All right, so we are welcoming Swan Huntley to the show. Welcome, Swan.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm happy to be here.
Scott was giving you applause. Let's do that again. Yay!
It was a silent applause for
Yeah.
those listeners. If you tune in on YouTube, you can see me clapping.
So Swan, tell me, you're a prolific writer. You have 3 books, which is like more than most people can ever even contemplate
More
that
than
are
I
out
read.
in the world, right? Tell me, what was the first book that you fell in love with?
Oh gosh, the first book I fell in love with. I don't think that this definitely wasn't the first book, but the first thing that just popped into my mind is The Bell Jar. For some reason, that is a book
Oh,
that I've
wow.
read like 15 times. I know it's an incredibly devastating
It is.
story. Well, it's also just the devastating life of Sylvia
Right.
Plath. I mean,
Right.
that's why it's extra devastating. I think if she were still alive, we would read it differently. Yeah, that's the first thing that popped into my mind.
Why were you so drawn to it, do you think?
I think the voice of it felt really honest to me. I think that's what I'm always looking for when I read. Like, does it feel alive? Does it feel honest? I think there's a real tendency to get fearful when you're making art. Everybody deals with this, and to try to make beautiful, intricate sentences, at the expense of honesty. And I
Yeah.
feel uninterested in that.
I agree. You articulated that really well. And now I'm going to have to give The Bell Jar another read because it's been a long time since I read it. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I am Laura Cathcart-Robbins. This is The Only One in the Room. But I'm never the only one in this room because my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun.
Hey, hon.
So today, as I said, we are talking to Swan Huntley. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She is the author of Getting Clean with Stevie Green, The Goddesses, and We Could Be Beautiful. She earned her MFA at Columbia University and has received fellowships from MacDowell and Yaddo. Her writings have appeared in Salon, the Rumpus, Go magazine, and McSweeney's Internet Tendency, among others. And Swan lives in Los Angeles, where we do. So again, welcome to the podcast, Swan. I'm just going to hold up your book for the people that are watching us on YouTube. This is your latest book. It just came out last month, and it is called Getting Clean with Stevie Green. And I just have to say that this is an unusual interview for a couple of reasons. One, my hair is straight. It's never straight.
Oh, yeah,
when
right.
we
You're
do
going
interviews.
against the brand, huh?
I am going against the brand. But it's just once a month I get it blow dried and colored mainly is what I get it. And then they blow dried afterwards and it's straight for a couple of days. But 2, it's really unusual because we had tried to do this remotely because we want to be very respectful of COVID and our guests and each other. And it did not work remotely. So Swan was gracious enough to come to our home. She's sitting in a separate room on one of our computers and headphones. So we're all in the same house, but none of us can see each other. But we're going to get the interview done this way. And I just want to, thank you again for doing that. It's really hard with the combination of COVID and technology to make things happen sometimes. And we're doing it. I'm very proud of us.
I'm so pleased to be here. Laura and Scott, for you who are listening or watching, have built me a little throne of blankets here. I'm so comfortable. This landscape behind me, you guys are killing it. This is the most professional podcast I've ever done.
Oh, yay. There
it's
you go.
all me, by the way.
Yeah, it is all him.
Thank you,
I set
Scott.
that studio up for you. You're welcome. Well, you drove all the way over. I wanted you to feel like we
Yeah.
were excited to have you.
No, he really worked on it. He started working on it as soon as we said yes to this idea. He went to work, and I was really impressed with the setup. And actually, Hun, we should take a picture of it and post it so that people can see Swan in her throne.
Sounds good.
So with that, Swan, tell me, how do you identify?
She, her.
Okay. So as I said, Getting Clean with Stevie Green dropped 125.22, right? Not dropped. This wasn't a record.
It actually got pushed just a week because of COVID, like factory delays. So it was 2/1.
Oh, 2/1. Okay. So it's this month that it's come out, which is great. For anyone who's listening, that means it's available right now and it's brand new. You can be one of the first to pick up the book. In the book, you said, I wanted to write about, sorry, not in the book, but at some point you said this. I think I got this from your publicist, actually. But I wanted to write about what it means to be struggling with the confusion of identities as an alcoholic and as a gay woman. And I have a lot of thoughts about that because I think the two, let me see how I want to put this. I think for people who aren't living authentically, and this includes myself at one point in my life, alcohol is a really helpful solution for that and can prolonged for me living authentically. It allowed me to live inauthentically for longer. And I don't know if that's your story as well, but I wanted to talk about that. And I think what I want to talk to you about, your real life journey toward living an authentic life, both as an alcoholic and a gay woman, and your fabulous novel. So I want to talk to you as the writer, but I also want to talk to you just as Swan Huntley. So how much of the story in Getting Clean with Stevie Green is your story, like percentage-wise, and how much is fabricated?
I mean, going back to what I originally said about being interested in work that is honest, it's emotionally, I hope as honest as possible.
Yeah.
The details, the fictional details are frequently made up. Like if I had to give it a percentage, I would say 90% made up. Well, it's hard to give that a percentage, but I didn't have a scandal that happened to me in high school. That's like one of the central mysteries of the book.
We love the scandal. That's what I read for On My Nightstand.
Oh, I'm so happy. But I did grow up in La Jolla, the town where it's set. I had never written a California book. I just thought, I've done a book in New York and a book in Hawaii, both places where I've spent a lot of time, and I should obviously do one in my hometown. And I think that doing that took me emotionally to a place where I was like suddenly very in touch with my 17-year-old self, who was incredibly confused, and in high school, which was just the worst time. Anytime I meet somebody who's like, high school is the best time of my life, I'm like, I don't relate to that at all.
Right, yes.
And yeah, what you said about, the denial about alcoholism, feeding the denial about other parts of my life is so my story. I came out when I was 26 and I got sober when I was 28. Like I'd been 28 for a week. So it didn't take very long.
Right.
And I just think of those two confusions as feeding one another. It was like, this happens to Stevie in the book. She's constantly getting drunk.
Right.
And hooking up with some guy and being like, well, I don't really know how I felt about that because I was wasted. That's what I was doing. I wasn't ready to know. And the alcohol helped me continue to not be ready to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so do you identify as queer?
I identify as just gay. Lesbian.
Okay. So tell me about that journey, what it looked like from when you were little through high school and then up until the time that you came out.
It's such a funny thing because it feels a lot like the alcoholism journey, where now I can look back and see very clearly, oh, I was so gay the whole time. And, oh, I was such an alcoholic the whole time. I mean, I can remember before I smoked my first cigarette, I was 12 years old and I got some lawn. Like I plucked my friend's lawn from the front yard and stuffed it into some notebook paper and like taped it shut and smoked that. It's like, that's like so not what normies are doing, But at the time it was like, no, but I think I'm fine. I think I'm like everybody else. I think I'm fine, I've since learned like if you're constantly telling yourself like, no, I'm fine. This is okay, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. If you're like constantly having that conversation, it's probably not a great sign.
Yeah.
And also if you're constantly, at least for me, I was constantly wondering, am I gay? Do I have a drinking problem? I think straight normies are not having that conversation with themselves either.
Probably not. No.
Right. And yeah, with the coming out piece and the sexuality piece, I was kind of going through the motions. Like I can remember having like very young, when I was very young, having feelings for a neighbor and thinking of girls in a certain way that like didn't seem to be reflected in the conversations that my friends were having. Mm-hmm. But then when 8th grade hit, like my genius friend, maybe it was 7th grade, was like, let's get boyfriends. So we got like boyfriends, which basically meant nothing. We just kissed each other badly. And both of my first 2 boyfriends turned out to be gay, which is so funny.
It's great.
Yeah. And yeah. And then I was just, I never had like a long-term relationship with a guy. I couldn't lie to myself that much. So I kind of just like briefly dated men until somebody basically, I managed to date this guy for like 4 months, and then he wanted to have sex with me when I was sober, and I was like, oh my God. We hadn't had sex before then. Like we hadn't been dating for that long. Yeah. Basically he wanted to be physical with me when we were sober on a Sunday afternoon, which is like when life is at its most real. And I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. Like the jig is totally up.
Oh, that's really interesting. So wait, when did you start drinking?
13.
At 13. Okay, so, and then up until that point, I always like to call the three horsemen: minimization, justification, and rationalization. So like those 3 things would step in for you, right? And say, no, it's okay, or I'm fine, or it was just this, or this makes sense because blah, blah, blah. But you were, I'm curious about this because I'm wondering, is it just similar? So your attraction to women at that point, did that feel more right to you than your attraction to men? Or did it, tell me.
It wasn't something that I was actively exploring because I wasn't really ready to deal with that.
Okay.
That's mostly true. When I was 17 years old, I did become enamored with the receptionist at my hair salon. She was 25 and she was like not a good character. Like she had been a stripper in Vegas. She had a sordid past. But I started smoking weed with her and doing other drugs with her. And I think she saw my confusion and she kind of, was manipulative, so but I felt I had really strong feelings for her. And then I kind of forgot about that and went to college. I didn't forget, but I, eventually got over it and then went to college. And then when I was in college, I had a roommate, and our relationship was very confusing. It was like we were emotional girlfriends, and sometimes we would get drunk and make out and like wake up in the same bed, but she always had a boyfriend too. But when I was in college, I did call my family and say, I remember I was drinking a bottle, like those big bottles of wine, 1.5 ml. I always thought that was 1.5 bottles. So I was like, oh, sweet, it's only 2 more glasses than a regular. But I've since learned it's actually 2 bottles. I was drinking one of those called Vendage. I lived in Florida at the time. Like in the daytime, like the lowest shelf wine, daytime. Called my family and I was like, okay, because me and this roommate had a falling out. And I remember one of my sisters just said, like, who cares? It's like, people were like, okay. Yeah. So it's interesting because it wasn't like anybody in my life would have been heavily against that. But I just wasn't ready to deal with it. So after that conversation, I just kind of started doing what I had been doing before, like dating guys and ignoring and not seeking to date women. So I kind of say I was kind of the revolving door of coming out, I was like, ooh, I have these feelings. Ooh, never mind. Can't deal with it.
Right, right. So it really, I mean, it truly seems like it took a while to emerge as. So I'm really curious as to when it did emerge and what happened that you said, "Oh my God, I am gay," or "This is not a revolving door anymore. This is who I am." What was that like?
I mean, this is a scene that's in the book, and it's what I described earlier. It's this guy who I managed to date for like 4 months. I was living in Boston at the time, and he wanted to be physical with me when we were sober. And I was like, I physically can't do this. You know, when
Yeah.
you're wasted, it's easy to, you're disembodied. You're not really there. So it was a painful thing for him and me. And I just remember saying, like, I'm tired, I don't feel good. I couldn't say the truth at the time. And then immediately going around the corner and getting a bottle of vodka and like calling everyone and being like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm done.
You're done. So it was like a masquerade that you were just giving up at that point.
Yeah, but I wasn't fully the masquerade myself, you know, fully aware of the masquerade myself. I think that's the thing about denial. It's like, now I can see, oh my God, I was lying to myself so much all the time. But at the time, I didn't really know that, you know?
Yeah.
I was doing the minimization, justification. What was the third one?
Rationalization
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so does your alcoholism, is that just like the next thing to be reckoned with at that point, now that you've made this admission to yourself at age 26? That maybe you need to look at your drinking. Does that happen right away, or does it, is it something like for me, after I recognized it, it still took a while for me to go get help for it. I don't know if that was your story, but tell me about that journey from that point at 26 to the time that you got sober at a week after you turned 28.
Sure. It's actually so similar to the sexuality story, where I didn't fully know until the very end. I was living, so I came out when I was living in Boston. I applied to grad school, and about a year and a half later, I'm living in New York. I'm going to grad school. My life looked really good on the outside. I had this cute apartment on 83rd and Riverside, and I was rollerblading all the time, and you know, going to school, and it seemed like, oh, I'm finally getting my life together. And I remember dating this woman who was a very heavy drinker. Of course, like, I surrounded myself with very heavy drinkers.
Right.
And I went to therapy, and I thought we were going to talk about how this woman wasn't that great the entire time. And we ended up talking about my drinking the entire time, surprisingly to me. And this therapist later told me, like, yeah, we were building the scaffolding for you to get sober. And I was like, what? Scaffolding? I had no idea, but thank you. I
So
love
she
that
knew,
therapist.
or was it a woman?
Yeah, I guess she knew. And I really have, like, so much gratitude for her. I still go see her when I go to New York. She works uptown now. And I, like, go see her just to say hi and have a session/chat. Like, she doesn't charge me. I love her so much. But we ended up talking about my drinking the entire time. And after that, I thought I should try to take a break, you know? And so basically, I had never tried to stop before. And I tried to stop, and I realized I couldn't, is the short version of the story. One other thing that happened in conjunction with that is that I reread the book Drinking a Love Story by Carolyn Knapp. Have you ever read that?
Love, yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I had bought that book like 2 years earlier when I was living in Boston, weirdly in the same neighborhood where she had lived. And I was working at a bar. I was drinking all the time. And I read this book. And I remember saying to my friends, like, if you feel bad about your drinking, you should just read this book. Because she has like scotch in her bag. Like, I was like, we're okay. Like, we're not her. For some reason, after that therapy session in New York, I went home and reread that book. And I was like, oh my God, I am her. And that stark change, you know, between like such a short span, a year and a half or 2 years, I was like, oh, that's really scary. But yeah, basically I tried to stop drinking, realized I couldn't. And when I realized I couldn't, I Googled AA. I went to my first AA meeting in Hawaii, which is where my dad lived. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, these people don't drink. And also, how could I not have known that? You know, like, but denial's so funny. You really just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so after that first meeting, I went to my favorite beach and got totally wasted one last time, like my goodbye drunk.
Good girl.
Yeah, right. And that was it.
That's amazing. So I wanted to just say two things. I can totally understand you going back to drinking a love story, especially because it was kind of that yardstick, or that the way that you measure how okay you were. If that was the worst, if she's the worst in this book, then you're always okay. And if you're looking at reckoning with your own alcoholism, I would have gone back to read it just to see if I was still okay. Like, maybe it's still not that bad. You know, maybe she's still worse. And then to find yourself in it, that's some real realness, right? That ability to see yourself where you weren't able to see yourself before because of the denial. And I wanted to know the story. You said long story short, but I want to know what it was, how it was that you couldn't stop drinking when you tried. Tell me that story.
Well, a couple of things happened. I went home for Thanksgiving break right after this therapy session. And I got really drunk on Thanksgiving, like blackout, remember nothing. And I woke up really early in the morning, like 6 a.m. And I woke my brother up and I was like, let's get stoned and let's go jogging at the beach. At that point, I was only smoking weed when I was still drunk. So I'd woken up still drunk.
Right.
But I was searching in other ways. You know, I was trying to get healthy. I was trying to exercise. So we got stoned. We were jogging on the beach. And I had this moment on this beach, which is like gorgeous. Beach in La Jolla Shores, which is where a lot of the book takes place. Like orange sky, seagulls. And I just had this thought. I always say I don't know if it was God or the weed, maybe both. But I was like, oh my God, I feel horrible right now. Why? Drinking. Like, it was just like drinking just like came to me. And it just felt like it's not only why I feel horrible right now, but it's why I feel horrible in my life in general. So I stopped my brother, who was there with me but living with me in New York at the time. Like, we had both flown home together. And so he was aware of what my daily life was like. And I told him the whole conversation in my head. And I expected him to say, no, you're cool. Like, you don't have a drinking problem. But when I told him, he was like, maybe. And I was like, you traitor. What? So for the rest of that weekend, I didn't drink, but I got just stoned and I ate so much. You know, it was just going into all the other voids.
Yeah.
And then about a month later for Christmas break was when I ended up, I went to Hawaii to see my dad, and I said, okay, this vacation, I am not going to drink. And then I just somehow found myself hiding behind the house, drinking a huge, like filled to the brim glass of red wine. And I thought, whoa, that's really scary. I've never tried to stop before. And my friends at the time didn't have the language for it. You know, they were like, oh, you fell off the wagon. It's okay. You know, kind of the same with like, I didn't have any gay friends. So when I came out, my friends were like, are you sure? You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You're fine. Like, my friends were doing the minimization, justification, rationalization thing too.
Yeah. So you had that kind of co-signing going on the whole way.
So much co-signing. Yeah.
I love that story. I love that story of you on the beach with your brother, and then you having that conversation, voicing it out loud. It's all, you know, those were all the steps you were taking toward getting well, right? Even though I know you didn't know that then. But just even saying out loud to him what you were feeling, and then having him reflect back to you, maybe it's something you should look at.
Oh my God, I was so terrified. I mean, I was just waiting for him to say, no, you're cool. Like, more co-signing.
Right.
Could not believe that he did that. So I really have him to thank.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah, you do. You do. That's, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's really helpful for people to hear. I know that if I were still drinking and was like confused or in denial, it would be helpful for me to hear someone else talk about their journey with that, because sometimes it doesn't look from the outside like this should be something you should address. And alcoholism to me is just really crafty, because, it talks about in 12-step literature how sometimes the destruction is on the dining room table, and sometimes it's just like inside. It's like an inside job, and no one can see it. And those are the times where the people from the outside reflect back to you that you're okay, I don't get it. Maybe you just need to cut back. Maybe you still like men, like maybe you can still be one of us is really what it all means. It's Scotty and I faced that when we stopped, when we went plant-based. And, we're both pretty fit people. We're pretty active. And we got pushback from people, not in a way that was aggressive or anything, but just like, oh, really, do you need to cut out everything? And maybe you could still eat this, or it would probably be okay if you had cheese. And but it's that we want you to be one of us. We want you to be like us,
I so feel you. I'm like a heartbeat away from becoming plant-based.
Yeah.
I'm just like obsessed with yogurt, which has become its own problem. It needs to
talk
go
Scotty.
soon.
He found a yogurt that he loves.
Oh, okay. Scotty, let's meet in the kitchen after
It's
this.
not very far away from you, yeah.
It's right there. Sorry, I just
see
called
you
you
looking
Scotty
over there.
because Laura called you Scotty.
Oh, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, but I'm very, have particular tastes food, and people are always like, no, eat the cake. And I'm like, I just can't eat sugar. I'm insane. Like, I can't do it,
Yes. Yeah.
But there's like this whole story about how, well, you're not having fun and you're not a fun person. And I'm like, no, I've had too much fun.
Right.
Like, the fun's over.
Well, and what does fun look like for me now versus what it looked like for me then? Fun is totally like Scott and I snuggling in bed and watching something on Netflix that we've been waiting for, or The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which starts today.
Oh, I can see you're so excited. I know what your night is.
I'm so excited. But that's really fun to me. And, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I would have nodded off before someone even finished that sentence if they were saying it to me, Mm-hmm. So it's subjective, it's all relative, but I think it's just whatever is healthy for you. And holistically healthy for me is the most important thing. All right, so Scotty flashed us the 20-minute sign, so I want to be mindful of our time. I'm looking at my notes because there's a bunch of other stuff that I wanted to talk to you about. I want to talk about organizing. This is Stevie. Stevie Green is an organizer. She's a declutterer. Her whole goal in the book is to become the #1 organizer on, what's the app called?
Organizely,
yeah. in the La Jolla area, right? Like in that area, she wants to be #1. Her competition is a woman in her 70s who's been doing it like forever. And obviously this is a distraction for her. Like, she has all this other stuff going on in her life and she's focusing on this one thing, but organizing is about control. So talk to me about, is this part of your real life?
My brother called me minimalist adjacent a couple years ago. I'll have to check in with him and see if I've become a minimalist now. But I think that, organizing is about control, obviously. And I also think it's a portal to inner organization. You could look at it that way. Like, this is what Marie Kondo says in her book. Like, if you make your space clean, then you can focus on what is inside. It's hard to focus when your external space is so disordered. So I think Stevie's using it in both ways, both as a control mechanism and as a way to seek knowledge about herself.
I like that. I can tell Scott liked it too, and he'll probably talk to you about that when we're done, because so my nightstand is piled with stuff. Like, if you knock into it, 16 things fall off. His is so organized. My desk is the same. Where I'm sitting right now, you can't obviously see it, but there's piles on either side of me going up and up and up. His desk is pristine. So it is part of the way that he is able to find serenity. That's, yeah.
And I appreciate that people like you don't, like some people it just doesn't bother them, and it's, it's fine.
Is it though?
It's part of your process.
Yeah. It is. It's part of my process. But also, going back to like alcoholism, and the ability to deny that for me that I was alcoholic, is my life didn't look messy, even though my desk is messy. Mm-hmm. I was very organized. I am organized, but not on my desk or my nightstand. But my life is very well planned out. And everything was on a calendar. Kids are here, husband's here, I'm here, tennis, PA meetings, blah, blah, blah. And so it looked very decluttered from the outside, which also was a way for me to keep drinking, because I had this, this nothing that anybody could call me on. It didn't look messy, which is how I think an alcoholic's life looks.
I mean, I so relate to that. I was so responsible on the outside. I showed up on time. I made my bed. I did, I had like the outside stuff on lockdown. I was actually at the Jekyll Hyde complex. I really was two people. I was like splitting into two people, and it was kind of scary at the end. I would write while I was drinking wine. Like for the first year of grad school, everything that I wrote, I was writing while drinking wine. And then when I was too drunk, I would start painting. And I remember waking up one morning and there was a new painting on the wall, and like the entire apartment had been cleaned. So there was no evidence that I had done that. And I was like, whoa, wow. That is freaky. It's like somebody else did that.
Yeah, that is really, it's not Jekyll and Hyde strictly, but it is two different people. That's amazing that your alcoholic personality cleaned up.
I know.
Made a beautiful piece of art.
Right? I was like, thanks, girl.
Right. Thanks, Stevie. So, decluttering secret, Stevie's decluttering secret was it like this? Yes or no? Like she would hold out her hands, right? And
mm-hmm.
And then so you would say, do you want this? Yes or no? And how long does she give them to answer?
5 seconds. This is kind of this is like my joke about the whole world of decluttering, because everybody has their own systems, like in their own language that they codify. Like that's part of what it means to be a cult, is you codify like specific terms, and then people follow you and they're like, oh, does this spark joy? And I just think the whole thing is hilarious, because all it comes down to is like, do you want this or do you not want this? Like, be honest with yourself. Yeah. So that's where I came up with that.
Yeah, well, I really appreciated it. I haven't done anything about it, but I've looked at my closet differently. And I think I told you, was that yesterday that we talked? Or the day before? Whenever it was. I did just recently pull some things out of my closet and give them away. Absolutely thought about you and Stevie the entire time. So just know that there's an impact.
I'm so happy. This is like an unexpected impact from the book, is that people are like, I reorganized. I'm like, oh, how great.
Yes. Yeah, well, it really made me look at the way that the excess in my life differently. Or it is making me look like that, because I've just recently finished it. So it's still, it's still in my head most of the time, and especially when it comes to stuff like that. So I appreciate it. I also just have to say it's really, really well written. And there are a lot of things that are well written that are difficult for me to get through, because there's just too much detail to process, and so I'm very slow with it. But your book was so enjoyable. It was such a quick read. I do that segment on my nightstand where I read aloud from something that I love. I read your book this week, and it's chapter 19, Stevie, and that's the incident that didn't happen that you're talking about. But when I'm reading it out loud to Scott, and he really wanted me to continue, which is sometimes the case, but it's not always the case when I'm reading aloud to him. It's really good. It's really good. And
Thank you.
yeah, I really loved it. And it's one of the gifts I get when I have authors on the show is to be able to read a lot of work. And this felt very close to memoir for me, just your style. I mean, I kept forgetting that it wasn't you. Is what was happening. I was reading, which I think is really good for a novel too. Like you want it to feel like a real life character. But was it scary to write something that was so close to your real life experience, the emotions?
I don't think it was scary because these are topics and emotions that I've processed a lot with a lot of therapists over the course of a lot of years. Like I've been sober for 11 years now. And I've been out for a while. So it felt like safe to talk about this stuff. And it felt like, oh, I haven't really navigated these topics yet in my work. And I should obviously do that. This is such a big part of my life.
Yeah.
I think, I was given the advice in grad school. I remember my professor, Dennis Lehane, who I so had like the biggest like boy crush on, was like, don't write about a divorce when you're going through a divorce, meaning don't write about what you are going through now. So like now I'm struggling with new things. I'm not sure that I would write about those, but these feel like very processed.
Mm-hmm. I totally get that. I totally get that. And it comes through like that. It doesn't feel raw as you're reading it. It still feels like you can still feel the tension, you still feel the stakes, like you're definitely, you're in. It doesn't feel raw and unprocessed like some work does. It definitely felt like you had some distance from it, but it's really good distance. It's like that perspective that you could write from and still bring us right into the moment, which you did really well. Like I said, I can't say enough about how great the book is, and I really hope that everybody who's listening makes sure that they get a copy. Did you do an Audible?
There is an Audible, yes, and there are, I think, 5 actors reading the voices because it's told from the point of view of 5 people. And it was so funny. I was at a friend's birthday party a couple months ago, and this woman was like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "I'm a novelist. What's your novel called?" "Getting Clean with Stevie Green." And she's like, "What? I think they just sent me that." So she ended up being the voice of Chris. Randomly met her here in Los Angeles. I know, isn't that funny?
That's really funny. It's so LA.
So LA.
I'm the voice of one of your characters.
I know, right? Yeah.
I love that. You mentioned that they pushed the launch date a week because of COVID, or they extended it a week, right? They pushed it. And it was later than it was supposed to be, a week later. 2020 and 2021 were the years of virtual book tours. What are you doing for yours? How's that going to look?
Also a virtual book tour, given the Omicron stuff. I had hoped to do stuff in person, but it's just not working out that way. So we'll have to wait for the next book to go in person.
Well, and the advantage, I think, to a virtual tour is that you can literally go anywhere in the world pretty quickly, right? Like you could be in an Australian book club tomorrow.
Right.
And then be in one in the Pacific Northwest like an hour later if you wanted to. So that kind of thing can happen. Do you have dates lined up so far?
I've done a couple dates before this, and I don't have any other things lined up at this moment.
Okay. I'm sure you will. It's just during the pandemic, I think people are still finding their footing and how to do these things, right? And that's why people are so ready for it to be over.
So ready.
Right? We just want to be done. So I'm going to ask you this. This is not going to be in this episode. This is going to be for our bonus content. But my question to you is, when do you feel that you're the most awkward? So tell me what's coming up next for you.
What is coming up next? I booked a last-minute trip to Portugal. I'm going there on Sunday to visit my sister who's there surfing. I'm very excited about that.
Oh, is she at that, what's it called? Where the big waves are?
No, she is not allowed to surf there. No. But we are going to go there. I think she might have chosen this region because of that documentary, 100 Foot Wave, if the rest of you haven't seen it. She's a little is it north or south? She's very close to that, so I think we'll go see it. She's in, I think it's pronounced Edisada. So I'm gonna go visit her, and I've asked her if she wants to go to Lisbon with me. She's like, she's very hesitantly a maybe. She's not really a city person. So we'll figure it out. I'm very excited about that. What else? I'm working on finishing a new novel, which is a lesbian psychological thriller.
Yes.
It is based on my experience of ghostwriting the memoirs of a reality TV star. During the process of working with her, she told me that I would be coming to her house. She was like, "You're be coming to my house," and I was like, "Well, we're in a pandemic, so maybe not." But I thought that was a really good setup for a book.
Yes, I like
so
that.
So that's the setup for a book, this new book that I'm working on, and inching my way towards veganism to follow you guys. Is what I'm doing.
You're going to grab that yogurt on your way out today, so.
Oh, yes.
You'll see. I love lesbian psychological thriller. I'm going to be looking forward to that. I also want to read the other two books you've written, which are The Goddesses and We Could Be Beautiful. This is the first book I knew of yours, even though you and I had met by happenstance. We were introduced by a mutual friend a couple years ago, maybe 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I knew you were a writer, but I don't think I realized that you were an author. So I'm going to pick up those books too and look forward to that one. Tell me, where can people find you?
People can find me at my website, www.swanhuntley.com, on Instagram, Swan Huntley. Those are the 2 places where I mainly hang out.
Yeah. Are you the only Swan Huntley in the world?
I'm the only one that I know of.
Yeah, probably.
I hope so. I better be the only one.
You're the only one in the room now.
Yeah.
The only swan in the room.
The only swan in the room. That should have been the title of your episode.
Oh, that should have been the title. Oh.
All right. Thank you so much, Swan. This was fantastic. Yep. And again, huge gratitude for leaving your abode, driving over here, and sitting on your throne of blankets to
so
do
my
this
pleasure.
interview.
This is so fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Swan. It was a great interview.
Hi, I'm Swan Huntley, and I'm the only one in the room who can't see her own mess.